Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. My name is Ethan. If you asked me a year ago, I'd have told you my life was perfect. A loving wife, Claire, 2 wonderful kids, a solid career, and a cozy home in the suburbs. What more could a man ask for? But I've learned that the illusion of perfection is like glass, fragile and easily shattered. It started innocently enough, with Claire leaving for one of her frequent business trips. As a marketing executive, she was always traveling to conferences or client meetings. "It's just part of the job," she'd say. I trusted her, never questioned her commitments. After all, isn't trust the foundation of a healthy marriage? That morning, the air was crisp with the first hints of autumn. Claire kissed me goodbye at the door, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. "I'll be back late tomorrow," she said, flashing that warm smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Don't forget Daniel's soccer practice this evening." "I've got it covered," I assured her, watching as she backed the car out of the driveway. Life felt ordinary, predictable. Later that day, while clearing out the glove compartment of her car to find an old insurance card for my own paperwork, I stumbled upon something odd, a hotel room key. It was from a quaint bed and breakfast 2 towns over. Scribbled on the key was a date, one I immediately recognized. It was the weekend of her last conference. At first, I brushed it off. Claire could have picked it up by mistake, or it might have been for a work-related meeting. Yet, something about it gnawed at me. Claire was meticulous, not one to misplace or mix up details. I tried to let it go. Over the next few days, life carried on as usual. The kids kept me busy with school activities and sports. Claire returned from her trip, looking radiant as ever. "How was it?" I asked, testing the waters. "Exhausting," she replied, sinking into the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Back-to-back meetings and presentations. But the client was impressed. She sounded genuine." I wanted to believe her. But a seed of doubt had already taken root, and it grew each time I noticed the little things. Claire's phone seemed to be glued to her hand more often than before. When it wasn't, it was tucked away in her bag or charging in a room she wasn't in. She'd laugh at texts but never share what was so funny. And then there were the late nights at work, which had become more frequent. One evening, she was unusually distracted at dinner, her gaze drifting to her phone every few minutes. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Oh, yeah," she said, barely looking up. "Just a lot on my plate right now." I nodded, trying not to let my imagination run wild. But the nagging feeling refused to leave me alone. A week later, I was going through our finances. Claire handled her own savings, a separate account she'd inherited after her parents' passing. I respected her privacy, but while sorting through the bills, I found an open folder on her desk. Inside were statements from her inheritance account. Curiosity got the better of me. I scanned the most recent statement and noticed something that stopped me cold, a $3,000 withdrawal from a jewelry store in the same town as the bed and breakfast. My stomach churned. Claire hadn't mentioned buying anything for me recently. We hadn't celebrated an anniversary or any special occasion. I picked up the phone and called the store, pretending to inquire about a warranty. The sales associate on the other end was polite and helpful. "Oh yes, I remember that transaction," she said cheerfully. "Your wife mentioned her wedding and engagement rings were stolen, and she wanted replacements." The floor felt like it had been ripped out from under me. Claire had never mentioned losing her rings. She still wore them every day, or so I thought. When she got home that evening, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her phone charging on the nightstand. I'd never snooped before. I didn't even know the passcode, but something told me to try. On a hunch, I entered our son Daniel's birthdate. The screen unlocked. I felt a pang of guilt as I scrolled through her messages, but it was drowned out by a stronger wave of dread. There were no incriminating texts, but one thread stood out, a string of emails with someone named Ryan. They seemed innocent enough at first, filled with work jargon and schedules. But as I scrolled further back, the tone shifted. "Last weekend was amazing," one read. "Can't wait to see you again." My heart pounded. Another email, "I still think about how you looked in that dress at the B&B. Next time, let's stay longer." My hands trembled. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself for safekeeping. I felt numb as I placed her phone back on the nightstand. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built a life with, was living a double life. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness. But amidst the chaos, a resolve began to form. I wasn't going to confront Claire with half-baked accusations. If she could deceive me so thoroughly, I'd need undeniable proof to protect myself and my kids from whatever fallout might come. That evening, while Claire was out at one of her late meetings, I installed a tracking app on her phone. It synced with mine, allowing me to see her location in real time. I hated the idea of spying, but I needed answers. Over the next week, the app confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't at her office during those late nights. She wasn't even in the city. Her location pinged repeatedly at the same bed and breakfast where I'd found the key. Each time, it coincided with her work trips. The illusion of my perfect life was crumbling, but I wasn't about to let it destroy me. Instead, I began to prepare for what came next. The days that followed were a haze of routine and careful planning. I went through the motions of normalcy for the sake of our kids, Daniel and Lily, but my mind was elsewhere. Every smile Claire gave me felt like a dagger to my chest, every shared meal like a cruel reminder of the facade we were living. Yet, I played my role perfectly. If she suspected anything, she gave no indication. The tracking app on her phone continued to deliver the truth I dreaded. Her frequent trips to the bed and breakfast, her late-night meetings, all corroborated the story I was piecing together. But the final nail in the coffin came one afternoon while I was scrolling through the app's history. A small notification popped up, a text message from Ryan. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same room as last time." It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. That evening, Claire came home in high spirits. She hugged the kids, kissed me on the cheek, and breezed into the kitchen to start dinner. I followed her, watching as she hummed softly while chopping vegetables, her wedding ring glinting under the overhead light. "Big day at work tomorrow?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She didn't look up. "Yeah, another late meeting. Don't wait up." I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Her confidence, her ease, it infuriated me. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening helping Daniel with his homework and reading Lily her favorite bedtime story. By the time I returned to our bedroom, Claire was already asleep. That night, I made the decision. No more sitting idly by. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed to act. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Once Claire left the house, I started making calls. First, to the lawyer I'd researched over the weekend, Margaret Klein, a no-nonsense divorce attorney with a reputation for dismantling cheaters in court. I scheduled a consultation for the following day and began gathering all the evidence I'd compiled, the screenshots, the tracking logs, the bank statements, and the emails. Then, I called a private investigator. His name was Alan Drake, and he came highly recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce of his own. Alan was direct and efficient. "I'll need access to her social media, her phone records, and any shared financial accounts," he said. "If there's anything else you suspect, now's the time to tell me." "I already have a lot of evidence," I admitted. "But I want more. I want everything. Alan agreed to start immediately. By the end of the day, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The wheels were in motion. When Claire returned home that evening, she seemed tired but cheerful. "Long day," she sighed, dropping her bag on the couch. "How were the kids?" "Good," I said, handing her a glass of wine. "Daniel aced his math quiz, and Lily wants to show you the picture she drew for art class." Claire smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling in that familiar way. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. This was the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the mother of my children. How had we ended up here? I shook the thought away. Love didn't excuse betrayal. The next morning, Claire left early for her meeting. I kissed her goodbye and watched as she drove away, her bag neatly packed for what she thought would be another seamless rendezvous. Once she was gone, I opened the tracking app and saw her heading straight for the bed and breakfast. I called Alan, and within an hour, he was parked outside the quaint inn, camera in hand. By lunchtime, he'd sent me photos of Claire and Ryan walking arm in arm, laughing as they entered the building. A few hours later, more photos came in, this time of the two of them leaving the room together, disheveled but glowing. When Claire returned home that evening, I played my part. I asked her about her day, helped her set the table for dinner, and listened as she told the kids a funny story about her meeting. I felt like a stranger in my own home, watching a woman I no longer recognized. That night, after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter. It wasn't addressed to Claire, it was for Ryan. If he was going to be a part of this, I decided, he deserved to know what was coming. "Dear Ryan," I typed. "You don't know me, but I know you. I know about the bed and breakfast, the texts, the emails, and the afternoons spent with my wife. I know everything. And soon, you'll know what it feels like to lose everything too." I didn't send the letter. Not yet. But just writing it gave me a sense of control, a reminder that I wasn't powerless. The following day, I met with Margaret Klein. She reviewed the evidence I'd gathered and nodded approvingly. "This is solid," she said. "With this, you'll have no trouble getting primary custody and a favorable division of assets." I felt a flicker of relief. "And Claire?" Margaret's expression was unreadable. "She's made her bed. Now she'll have to lie in it." As I left her office, I couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. The life I'd built with Claire was over, but I wasn't going to let her tear everything apart. For Daniel and Lily's sake, I would make sure the transition was as smooth as possible. That evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, Claire came into the room and kissed them goodnight. "You're such a great dad," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so lucky to have you." I forced a smile, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. Lucky, I thought bitterly. She wouldn't feel so lucky when the truth came crashing down around her. But for now, I kept my silence. The storm was brewing, and I was ready to weather it. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting golden beams across the kitchen table where I sat with my coffee. Claire had already left for work, at least, that's where she said she was going. The tracking app confirmed otherwise. She was back at the bed and breakfast, and Alan was on her trail. By now, my anger had sharpened into resolve. The Claire I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who wore the mask of my wife while betraying everything we'd built together. But I wasn't going to let her deceit destroy me or hurt our kids. If she wanted to rewrite the rules, I'd show her what the game looked like when I played to win. Alan called me just before noon. "They're heading to a nearby cafe," he said. "Want me to follow?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "And send me everything." By the time I received the photos, I felt a strange calm. There was Claire, sitting across from Ryan at a small, sunlit table. They were laughing, leaning close, hands brushing. She looked happy. Genuinely happy. And that only solidified my resolve. That afternoon, I met with Margaret Klein again. This time, I brought Alan's latest findings, the photos, timestamps, and even a copy of Ryan's background report. Turns out, Ryan was married too, with a wife and 2 young children. A small, vindictive part of me relished the idea of exposing him just as thoroughly as I was about to expose Claire. "This is perfect," Margaret said, flipping through the file. "We'll build a case so airtight, she won't have room to argue. Are you ready for this?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've had enough." Margaret nodded. "Then let's set the wheels in motion." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I filed for divorce, citing infidelity and providing the evidence to back it up. Margaret promised to keep things swift and discreet, but she didn't sugarcoat the reality. "Claire's going to fight back," she warned. "Be prepared for her to play the victim." I was ready for anything. That Friday, after the kids were in bed, I decided it was time to confront Claire. I'd rehearsed the moment in my head 100 times, imagining every possible reaction. Anger, denial, tears, I braced myself for all of it. She came home late, her heels clicking against the tile as she entered the kitchen. She looked startled to see me sitting at the table, the envelope of evidence in front of me. "Ethan," she said, setting her bag down. "What's going on?" I gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. She hesitated but sat down, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Is something wrong?" I slid the envelope across the table. "Why don't you tell me?" Her brow furrowed as she opened it. The color drained from her face as she sifted through the photos, the emails, the bank statements. When she reached the last page, her hands trembled. "I can explain," she stammered, looking up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Don't," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I don't want excuses. I don't want apologies. I want the truth." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ryan and it wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "That's the best you've got? You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to sneak around behind my back, lie to my face, and destroy our family?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I was unhappy, Ethan. I felt invisible. You're always so busy with work and the kids. I needed someone to notice me." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice rising. "You felt neglected, so you decided to throw away 15 years of marriage?" "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." "Don't you dare say that," I snapped. "Love doesn't do this. Love doesn't lie, cheat, and humiliate." She reached across the table, but I pulled back, standing abruptly. "I've already filed for divorce," I said, my tone final. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Claire's face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "What about the kids?" she choked out. "What are we going to tell them?" "We'll tell them the truth," I said. "That their mother made choices that tore our family apart." She shook her head. "Ethan, please. Don't do this. Let's go to counseling. We can fix this." I looked at her, a woman I no longer recognized. "You can't fix this, Claire. You broke it beyond repair." Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. My heart ached, but I didn't look back. The next morning, Claire tried to talk to me again, but I shut her down. "Save it for the lawyers," I said curtly. She spent the day in the guest room, crying while I focused on the kids, keeping them oblivious to the storm brewing in our home. By the end of the week, Claire had moved out. She tried to explain things to Daniel and Lily, but they were too young to understand. All they knew was that their mom wasn't coming home. It wasn't easy, but I knew I was doing the right thing. Claire's betrayal had cut deep, but it wouldn't define me. I had a life to rebuild, for myself and my children. And I wasn't going to let her or Ryan take that from me. The reckoning was here, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Life without Claire was strange at first. The house felt emptier, quieter. The kids asked about her constantly, and I did my best to shield them from the truth, offering only that Mommy needed time to herself. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. The divorce process moved swiftly. Claire tried to fight, but with the evidence Margaret had meticulously assembled, there wasn't much she could do. I secured full custody of Daniel and Lily, kept the house, and minimized Claire's share of our assets. She moved into a small apartment across town, and while the kids visited her occasionally, the bond between them was strained. Weeks turned into months, and the ache of betrayal dulled, replaced by a growing sense of clarity. I threw myself into my work and focused on the kids, finding solace in the routine. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. But life has a way of surprising you. One Saturday morning, as I was clearing out the attic, I came across an old shoebox. It was filled with keepsakes from our early days, movie stubs, letters, photos. I almost threw it aside but decided to sift through it for a moment. At the bottom of the box was something I hadn't seen in years, a handwritten letter from Claire. The envelope was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded. It was dated just a week before our wedding. Curious, I opened it and began to read. Dear Ethan. I wanted to write this down because I've been holding something in, and I'm terrified of saying it out loud. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't want to ruin what we have. But I need to be honest with you. Before we met, I made mistakes. One of them was Ryan. Yes, the same Ryan who's standing beside you at our wedding. He wasn't just my friend, he was someone I cared about deeply. We were together briefly, and it ended long before you and I began. I thought I'd moved on, but when I saw him again after we started dating, I realized I hadn't fully let go. It was nothing, just a passing moment of confusion. I know what I want, and it's you. But I needed to write this, to be honest with myself and with you. Ryan is part of my past, and you're my future. I love you with all my heart, Ethan, and I promise to be the best wife I can be. My hands trembled as I read the words. Ryan had been part of her life long before I entered the picture. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Had their affair started earlier than I'd realized? Had it ever truly ended? I shoved the letter back into the box, my heart pounding. I needed answers. That afternoon, I drove to Claire's apartment. She looked surprised to see me but invited me in. The apartment was small and sparsely decorated, a far cry from the life we'd shared. I found something, I said, pulling out the letter. I need to know the truth. Her face paled as she read it. Ethan, she began, her voice trembling. That was a long time ago. Did it ever stop? I demanded. Was I just a placeholder until you could have him again? Tears welled in her eyes. No, Ethan. It wasn't like that. When we got married, I left Ryan in the past. I loved you. I still love you. Then why did you go back to him? I asked, my voice rising. Why risk everything we had for someone you claimed to have moved on from? She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. I don't know, she whispered. I guess, part of me never let go. But it didn't mean I didn't love you. Her words felt hollow, but they struck a chord. Had I been so focused on being the perfect husband and father that I missed the cracks forming in our foundation? Had she been searching for something I couldn't provide? As I drove home, my thoughts spiraled. The letter changed everything. It reframed our marriage, our divorce, even her betrayal. But it also raised a question I couldn't shake: was I ready to let go of the bitterness? Could I find peace in understanding, even if it didn't erase the pain? Weeks passed, and I kept the letter hidden away. I didn't tell Margaret, didn't bring it up in court. It felt like a secret, a fragment of a life that was no longer mine. Then, one evening, I received a call from Alan. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Ryan's wife just filed for divorce. She found out about the affair." I paused, unsure how to feel. "What does that have to do with me?" "She's suing Claire too," Alan explained. "For alienation of affection. It could cost her everything." The irony wasn't lost on me. Claire had burned her bridges, and now the flames were coming for her. But instead of satisfaction, I felt nothing. The rage, the betrayal, it all seemed so distant now. A few days later, I sent Claire a message: "For the kid's sake, I hope you figure out what you're looking for. I'm done being angry. I wish you peace." It wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. But it was a step forward. And in the end, that was all I needed.